I think you're most well known for your learning model of addiction. We've already touched on it a little bit, but for someone hearing about it for the first time, what is it, and why is this important for mental health professionals, particularly, to understand?
I mean, learning is just about everything that happens to us. We come out of the womb pretty much unformed in so many respects. And we first learn about relationships from obviously our interactions with our caregivers, and so forth. Learning how to regulate emotions is learning how to feel better. But there's all kinds of steps along the way that are jump off points for different kinds of learning. For example, when kids get theory of mind about the age of 3.5 or 4, once they can conceptualize that other people have a subjectivity, have a mind. My mom is looking at me with that look again. So she's probably thinking that I did something bad and I'm going to get in trouble. And kids start that at age 4. Well, then what are they going to do about it? Well, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, mommy, I won't do it again. Or they're going to, run and hide, or they're going to beat up on their little brother or sister or whatever it is. And that's a way to learn to regulate in a specific context, given a particular developmental stage or milestone. Well, you take that on up the age span, and there's different kinds of learning that go on at each step. And especially in adolescence, of course, we know that the availability of substances and alcohol is a massive social, contextual factor. So now it's like you probably are learning to use a lot, a little, every day, or to shun it and avoid it. Luckily, my present generation of children, my 17-year-old boys, go to the gym instead. I wish I had at that age, but I didn't. But that's learning, it's all learning. It's all learning. And learning how to have social relationships, how to be a good social participant and have friends and make friends and feel happy with other people. That's learning too, learning how to listen, how to be polite and considerate and, accommodating. That's learning too. And if you don't learn that well, you're more likely to learn other ways to feel okay, to feel safe from depression, and those might involve alcohol and drugs. So I just see it all as learning. It's all learning. But the thing about learning is, the brain is only one way to learn, and that's to repeat something. And when you repeat some addictive behavior, when you repeat some regulatory behavior, some way of regulating your emotions and feeling better, and it's reinforcing, and you do it again and again and again and again, you're building synaptic patterns. What fires together wires together, and you're building networks of associations that will make it more and more likely to go there again the next time around, whether it's the next evening or the next week or the next weekend or what have you.
And I can see why this would be beneficial for both people struggling with addiction, but also mental health professionals working with their with clients. Because if you're looking at it as learning, then you can learn new behaviors, new patterns, and neuroplasticity happens, and you can gradually change what's the wiring there. But have you thought much about limitations here, in the sense? I interviewed a guy last week for this called Oliver Morgan. Are you familiar with Oliver's work? No. He's published a book recently on addiction, and he looks at it from maybe a really broad context. So he takes in the learning model, he takes in, or he thinks about it, from the point of view of learning, the point of view of disease, the point of view of social ecology. And he says that there's great power in the learning model. His contention is that it views addiction only within the individual, and it doesn't take into account the social factors and the contextual factors and the societal factors that are at work here. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. I know you've thought a lot about that, so I'm just curious, what would you respond to that?
Well, there are powerful societal factors. We know that racism, poverty, oppression, sexism, various ways of becoming marginalized or alienated, having less power, not being able to control your life, are grounds will increase the odds of addiction. It's that simple. But you can always insert a mediating factor, because it makes you more miserable to not have a shitty job and not be able to, direct your own life course the way you might think is valuable and exciting. You're going to be more depressed and more bored and more anxious or whatever it is. And then you're going to do stuff that will make you feel better. So you can always translate those social forces into what's going on around the individual. I guess I like to think of it, I like Johann Hari's phrase, the one he made famous, that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And we know that a lot of societal factors will constrain the amount of connections people can have with with others who might be supportive and caring and resourceful. Well, so you might start off with a certain kind of isolation based on some of these societal factors. You're at risk, so to speak. And then you start to use drugs or whatever it is, or drink too much, and people don't want to really be around you, except maybe other people who use those substances or drink a lot. So the social world becomes more and more contracted, has less and less opportunity for freedom and movement and excitement. And while the social world is contracting, so you're getting less and less juice from that, the appeal of the substances becomes relatively more attractive. And that is a feedback loop right there. The more you use, the less connection you're able to maintain, the less, shall we say, creative or valuable connection you're able to maintain. I see it kind of as we haven't talked about the brain yet, but certainly in learning, the brain does a lot of very interesting things, like pruning of synapses. It's a very critical part of all learning. The brain consolidates its networks by getting rid of connections that are no longer needed. So the brain is becoming more and more, shall we say, focused or contracted or constrained. At the same time, the social world is becoming more and more contracted and constrained. Well, that would be the case if you're learning the French horn. You're more likely to fall into a small group of people who also play in the orchestra. That's fine, right? But if you're a heroin addict, the same formula does not offer you sunny horizons, right? Because the habit is forming and constraining, and the social world is contracting, and they're just feeding back and forth until you're really stuck.
That's very well said. And I suppose it chimes well with what we were speaking about earlier. And that guy actually said, addiction is a jealous relationship. It crowds out most of the other relationships in your life too.
Yeah.
Now you have given several talks and written, I suppose, the book, The Biology of Desire, I think the title was. So you know a lot about the neuroscience going on here. So I maybe want to transition briefly into this now. And what areas of the brain are implicated in the addictive process?
So yeah, the brain is obviously a very complex place, but I think identifying the main areas and what they're doing is a way to open up what learning actually means. Learning is not just like, learning where to park your car, or learning, the steps of the key of G when you're learning to play the piano. It also has a very strong emotional element. And anything that stays in mind long enough to be learned, to be repeated, is going to have some emotional impact. So that means that the emotional parts of the brain are very involved. And that includes, for example, the striatum, which is a sort of big cluster of structures, sometimes called the basal ganglia, that are involved initially, that means to say in our evolutionary history, involved in movement. This is the part of the brain that's very old. It's the movement brain. It tells animals what to do. And what you do when you're any kind of an animal is you go after resources. You go after what you need, whether it's food or sex or whatever it is, or safety. So that in humans, that part of the brain still directs us towards what we need, what we require, what we value, what we like, and it develops, shall we say, emotional incentives or emotional urges to move toward those goals. So the striatum becomes a center of emotion-driven goals. Well, when they talk about dopamine, which they always do when they talk about brain and addiction, what dopamine is not to get technical, but it's a neurochemical that fuels the attractiveness of rewards, makes things valuable, makes you want them, so you move towards them and you get a dopamine reward on the way there. And once you get them, especially if you get more than you expected, you get a dopamine reward. All that stuff is building synaptic structures in the striatum. And that means you're learning what's valuable to you and what you want to go after. And it isn't just pizza and it isn't just sex. It's also, crack cocaine or whatever it is. And then it gets more complicated after that, because the striatum itself has got a kind of impulsive section for impulsive behavior, like, yeah, let's go get high. That sounds great. Versus the compulsive behaviors, which is more like, I have to do it. I always do it. I need to do it. It's like biting my nails. I just do it. Well, those are different kinds of emotional learning, so to speak, motivated learning. They're quite different. And when we talk about addiction, we often talk about compulsion because it seems as though it becomes automatic if it's bad enough. It isn't really automatic, but it seems to be. And it becomes harder not to do it because the thrust is there before you even start thinking about it. So there's all that stuff. Sorry, I'm making it's a long answer, but so there's that emotional brain, so to speak. But there's also the good old prefrontal cortex that we value so much, because that's where we make our decisions, and that's where we say, no, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that. That's got us in a lot of trouble last weekend. And when we got home, my wife gave me such shit. So I'm not going there. So that's the other side of the algorithm. That's no, the part that says no. It's very important for everything we do.
And am I right in saying in addiction that the connection and the communication between the ventral striatum, which is responsible for motivation, emotion, etc., the communication between that and the prefrontal cortex gets broken down, so there's less of it happening whenever there's a strong addiction at work?
I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's pretty much what happens, because the prefrontal cortex gets activated by making decisions, making choices, decision making, value attribution, and all the rest of it, and planning. Well, but if you just go after what makes you feel great or makes you feel better than shit, time after time, day after day, night after night, then you're not really using this at all anymore. You're not making choices. There's no choices to be made. I mean, I know what I need, I know what I like, and nothing else in my horizon. So that part kind of shuts down or becomes less activated. And there's actually studies that show that parts of the prefrontal cortex lose synaptic density over a period of time that addiction is taking place. And that's with alcohol, heroin, or I think cocaine, one of the other drugs. Nora Volkow, the head of NIDA, has done some of that work. It happens with eating disorders too. So it's not just substances, but if you stop making decisions, this part of the brain just becomes, shall we say, underactivated. And maybe that results in a loss of synaptic connections. And then the striatum, and especially the dorsal striatum that's in charge of compulsion, has got pretty much a free rein.
Wow, that's scary. So the longer you are involved in this process of addiction, then the more gray matter your brain is essentially losing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I don't want to be too, strict about that but yes, I think that's right. But we shouldn't think that that's because drugs are killing the brain. That's just not true. People can take heroin for 40 years and be absolutely fine and healthy and cognitively sharp. It's amazing, but it's true. There's a lot of some legendary jazz musicians and so forth have taken heroin their entire careers. Same with meth. You can take meth for 20 years and be cognitively fine. You can take too much and you can really screw yourself up. But drugs don't kill brain cells. Rather, drugs can be the focus of habits that utilize some sections and therefore that overutilize some regions and underutilize other regions. And the underutilization results in pruning. Pruning, just like you prune the hedge, around the garden, you cut off the excess branches. That's the word they use for the ongoing developmental loss of synapses, neural connections.
If you're interested in seeing the full session and 34 others like it, you might want to check out the Holistic Recovery Summit. This is a revolutionary free online conference which brings together 35 world-leading clinical psychologists, researchers, and practitioners who will share with you their best practices for mind, body, social, and spiritual approaches to addiction treatment, enabling you to be at the forefront of evidence-based care. With a lineup including Stephen Porges, Janina Fisher, Ian McGilchrist, Pat Ogden, Anna Lemke, Stephen Hayes, Richard Schwartz, and 28 others, this really is a once-in-a-lifetime learning opportunity. The best bit is it's 100% free to attend live, and you can do so from the comfort of home. You'll also be able to upgrade to your recordings and certification pass after registration, although this is entirely optional. For more information, please check out the sign-up link in the description.